Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning into video number 2 of the mead making class at Honey Girl. I have a few things in front of me here that we're going to go through today. It's very exciting. You're going to want your primary bucket. That's going to be where you're fermenting the mead. We're going to be taking honey, which is our fermentable sugar, and we're going to be adding yeast and water to it. The water will dilute it down and allow for the yeast to actually ferment and metabolize all of that sugar and convert it into alcohol, which is what you're going to want to drink at the end. You're going to need a gallon of honey. So we've provided that from King Cobra. You're going to need your yeast packet. So it looks like this. It has 71B. It's about 5 grams of yeast, which is all you're going to need. And you're going to be rehydrating those yeast with the Go Firm Protect Evolution. You'll be feeding it with Fermade O as we go, and I'll talk about that in the next video. You also want to have your airlock, and you're going to want to have a hydrometer as well. And a note for the hydrometer, we actually do have a bunch of these in stock now. If you didn't have one included in your mead kit, feel free to stop by and we'll give you one for free. You'll also want to use soap and warm water when you're making the mead kit. You're going to want to just clean everything. So I've gone ahead and cleaned the bucket with soap and warm water. You typically want to use a soap that's very neutral, not like a scented one. And I just want to make sure I rinse all of that out before using it. All of the parts that you use should be cleaned and sanitized. Also make sure to wash your hands prior to doing any fermentation in general. It's good practice. Wash your hands. Wash your hands. Just wash your hands in general, guys. Honey is a very sugar-dense fermentable. It ends up being about 85% sugar by weight. And so yeast can't ferment that in its current form because it is so sugar-dense that they can actually rehydrate, reactivate, and start fermenting. And that's why honey is able to last forever on the shelf. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that that gets diluted down. And a good typical number when you're making mead is somewhere in the range of 2 to 4 pounds per gallon of honey to water. So that means that if I'm going to use about a gallon of honey, I should expect to get about 12 pounds out of that gallon. And that means I should be able to add about 4 gallons of water to this, making a 5-gallon bucket of mead. Make sure that your spigot is turned off on this. On is like where it says on. It's pretty self-explanatory. Make sure you want to make sure your spigot is off before you start pouring honey in. If your honey is crystallized, which mine is currently, you might find it's going to be easier or harder depending on how crystal it is. This seems fairly liquid, so I'm going to try and pour it directly into my bucket here. And again, I have gone ahead and sanitized this with soap and warm water and then washed out that soapy water. So we're going to just add our honey, and it's just going to squirt out like this. Yeah, it seems like it's going fairly easily. Again, if you find it's really hard to get it out because it's really crystallized, you can either set this on your back porch on a warm day, let the sun heat it up, or you can put it in some warm water. You could just take your 5-gallon bucket and fill it with warm water and then put your honey in there for about an hour inside of the jar closed. Crystallization won't affect the flavor. It's just the sugar becoming crystallized. So this isn't going to taste off or any different because it was crystallized. I'm probably going to end up pouring some water into here to get the remaining out, and then I'll shake it up. It's really good honey.
It looks good.
It's delicious. So I have about 5 gallons of warm water here, and this water has been filtered. For you at home, I would recommend either going to your grocery store and buying spring water, or if you have a water filter at home that's like a carbon filter, that will also work. But you just don't want to use regular city water in what you're doing because it has chlorine, chloramine, different compounds in there that will inhibit the yeast and prevent them from fermenting properly. So right now I'm just going to fill this with a little water and try and shake this honey up to get the rest of it out of this jug. This is like the Taco Bell of me. So I've gone ahead and added my gallon of honey into my bucket that will be my fermenter. I'm going to use my sanitized spoon and I'm going to stir that honey in with the water. So you're just going to see this rich golden color start to form inside the bucket. And you can see that there's still plenty of honey that hasn't been diluted yet. So I want to keep going and stirring until I no longer am able to pull up any honey on my stirring utensil. Let's see, yeah, you can still see that there's some honey on the bottom of my spoon here. So I want to keep going. Yeah, there's still a little in there. I'm just smelling it. I have a rich smell of like butterscotch and like clover and just all sorts of nectar from that honey. It always smells so good when you're making mead. Guarantee your house will smell good for like a day when you're making this. And then when it's fermenting and when the airlock is bubbling, you're gonna smell all those delicious smells also. That looks pretty good. That's pretty well diluted. There might be a little bit in there still, but I'm happy. So the next step for this is we're gonna add enough water to be about 5 gallons in total. You can see that there's a clear line right here, and that's about 5 gallons. I feel comfortable filling it just below that because we're gonna be adding a little bit of water throughout the week as we feed it the nutrients it needs to survive. So I'm just gonna add 5 gallons of water. And I'm going to decide to do it about halfway between those 2 rings at the top. You're going to want to mix that one more time to make sure all the honey and the water are mixed properly. What you've made here is what we call must. And so must, again, is just honey that's been diluted down with water. If you add blueberries or strawberries or pumpkin spices to it, it's still called a must at that point. It's just what we call it. Okay, we're at the stage where we're going to actually use that hydrometer I mentioned before. Again, if you don't have one of these at home or you bought the Mead kit and it wasn't included, please just come in and we're going to supply you one for free. So the hydrometer is actually something that measures how much sugar is in a liquid. So it has a scale on it. One of the scales has like 80, 90, 1.000, 10, 20, 30. That's actually specific gravity. There's another one that says potential alcohol, and that'll show like 0%, 5%, 10% potential alcohol. Another way to look at it that's a little bit easier and more intuitive is the potential alcohol scale. That'll tell you at the beginning of your fermentation, if it were to completely ferment all of the sugars, how much alcohol you would get. And so we just want to kind of clear some of this foam away so we can see it clearly. And it looks to me like I have a potential alcohol of about 12.5%. The way I read that is I look at that 10. Every tick mark beneath that is going to be a higher alcohol point. I'll show you. It goes up to like 15 there. And just drop it in. And you'll see it's around 1.09 on that specific gravity, and on the potential alcohol about 12.5%. So when we're finished fermenting, we should get a mead around 12.5% alcohol. Okay, so the next step for the fermentation is going to be our rehydration protocol. For that, you're going to want the Go Firm Protect Evolution, and you're going to want the packet of 71B yeast. The first thing that you're going to do is get about 4 cups of water, and I like to have it around 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the first thing I'm going to add to my water is going to be my Go Firm. This solution helps the yeast to rehydrate. It gives them the nutrients that they need to start off the fermentation very healthily. And again, I'm adding this to about 110 degree Fahrenheit water. So you're just going to go ahead and add all 10 grams, the whole package of Go Firm, to your 4 cups of water. And I just like to take them and kind of like press them against the wall or whatever I'm using. And that really helps to break those clumps up. And so that looks pretty good. I'm gonna let that sit for about 5 minutes and just let that rehydrate. And that again, that's before I've added my yeast. And all I've done so far is just added Go Firm Protect to the water. And I'm gonna let that cool to about 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's usually where I wanna add those yeast. Anything above 104 can kill the yeast, or at least stress them out. So we really don't wanna add them until the liquid is at about 104. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes, and I'm just checking on my Go Firm. It's very well integrated now. You can see there's no clumps, so I'm pretty happy with that. And the temperature is about 104 degrees, which is exactly where I want it to pitch my yeast. I'm just gonna open this little baggie of yeast. We're gonna dump all of those in to the solution of Go Firm and water. You just sprinkle them on top, and then give it a little light stir. And you're just gonna let them sit for another about 5 to 10 minutes. Now this is a timed step. You're gonna wanna see the yeast start to sort of bubble at about 5 to 10 minutes. If you wait any longer than about 15 minutes, they're gonna start going hungry. They come from the yeast producer dehydrated, and they don't really have any nutrients in there. So this is something where we're gonna wanna feed them some of the must in about 10 to 15 minutes. Just a little bit of bubbles. Not too many from my yeast yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and feed them just because it's been about 10 minutes. So I'm just gonna take a little bit of the must from the mead, and I'm gonna pour that in. This is called tempering your yeast. So if you're following on the instructions, this is that step where we're slowly adding some of the honey water mixture to that yeast in order to give them some sugar that they need to survive. It also helps them balance the pH. It helps them get used to how much sugar, what acidity is in the liquid, all of those things. And I usually just like to ladle a couple of cups into the mixture. That should be plenty of sugar to get those yeast happy. So I'm just gonna give it a stir. And then we're gonna wait another 5 minutes, and hopefully we're gonna see some good bubbles in this, and then we're gonna pitch that yeast into our bucket of must. Okay, so there's a little bit of bubbles happening on top of the yeast, so I know that it's ready to pitch. And so I'm just gonna give it one more stir to make sure that there's no sediment on the bottom. And then I'm gonna take my yeast mixture and I'm gonna add it to my primary fermenter. And you're gonna pitch it right in. This will inoculate your mead and allow it to begin fermenting. You should see bubbling happening anywhere from a couple of hours to overnight. And there you have it. You have about 5 gallons of must that has been inoculated with yeast. Now that the must has been made and inoculated, we're gonna add our lid to our fermenter. Just make sure that it gets locked in securely. It'll click onto the bucket. And you're gonna have a little hole here. You're gonna want to put some water into your S-style airlock. You're gonna see it says max right there about halfway up it. That's about how much water you're gonna want in it. So I'm just gonna get a little bit. It's very easy. If you overfill it, you can just dump it out a little bit, and then you can see I'm right around the max line. I'm gonna put that little white piece back on. I'm just gonna stick that rubber tube and S-style airlock in that hole. That's gonna create a, what's the word I'm looking for? That's gonna create a seal and prevent oxygen or bugs or anything weird getting into your mead while it's fermenting. You're gonna see pressure begin to build in this side of the airlock, pushing this water down over time. It will begin to bubble after about anywhere from 2 to 24 hours. And that bubbling is actually CO2 being released during the fermentation. The yeast are taking sugar and converting it into energy for themselves, and then the byproduct is alcohol and carbon dioxide. We're going to be releasing another video about the feeding protocol where we're going to use some Fermate O, and we're going to be feeding those yeast in, over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. So stay tuned. What's it? Stay yeasty? Do I really have to say this? Stay yeasty.